All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're glad to have you here tonight. My name is Monty Banks, the world's cheesiest lounge singer. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the one and only Ronnie Pierce.
That's right.
Man of music.
Yeah.
And, we're going to spend a little time with Ronnie asking about different experiences he had. He's a great jazz musician and had a contribution in the world of jazz for years and years. You can find him right here in Seattle.
Yeah.
And I know it's a little bit pedantic, but why don't I ask, just how did you get started in the first place? Your very first musical experiences, and how did you get started in the first place?
And you were sure you want to go back that far?
Yeah, I think you should go back that far.
Well, let's see. I was 10 years old, and this friend of mine who had one leg shorter than me.
No way.
Yeah, and he went to the public school and took up the trumpet. So he insisted, me being his best friend and playing football and softball and all that, take up the trumpet. So I took up the trumpet, and what had happened is I got hit in the face with a baseball bat because the thumb, the letter "thash" was open, and a man threw a high pop fly came right down and busted my front tooth off. So then the trumpet teacher says, you can't have all that space in your front tooth. Oh. So they pulled the tooth out, and I could squirt water, 50 feet. It was great, So then I was still in this Monday night band, and Paul R. Cronenberger was a trumpet teacher. Cronenberger taught at Sherman and Clay. And I noticed this one kid named Owen Nelson. And all of a sudden, he was starting to play the clarinet better than anybody. He was, and I know that trumpet player didn't know a thing about clarinet because I found that out right away. So after listening to Owen Nelson, I thought, well, how did he do that? That is very good, And so I went to Owen Nelson. I said, how did you learn to play like that? And he says, well, my parents took me down to Sherman and Clay, and I took lessons from Johnny Jessen. And I said,
the great Johnny
Jessen, who became my father, actually, because my dad was out having a ball with the chicks. My mother split and went to New York, so I would and the dog died.
Even the dog died?
The dog died. So I'm all by myself, They say life begins when the kids leave home and the dog dies.
This is in Puyallup?
No, this is in Lake Forest Park. We lived right overlooking the water, and it was full of beautiful bushes because the guy owned the house before. My dad was a University of Washington forest teacher, forest major. So he was a professor. So there was maidenhair ferns and roses and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm overlooking Lake Washington, and nobody home. Mom went and became a hostess. Now, Mother, Flo, was a bubble. She was absolutely a great bubble. And we lived out by Wild Waves when I was 5. And she, at 16, became the hostess of the Green Parrot Inn, which is the hottest chicken roadhouse on the West Coast. It was famous. The governors would come there. She's only 16, but they loved Flo. So Flo was a natural bubble. And just
meaning she had a vivacious personality.
Yeah, everybody felt
thrilled
good
when they met her.
Yeah, and so Flo had that job for. There was the best biscuits and the best chicken, and so Flo was, my mother, and she would walk from Harding, which was a Indian school up the street, to go to work for Geo Gates, which owned the place, Myrtle and Geo, something like that. So that was really something for her at 16 to be recognized as who she was at Flo. So Flo then split at 10 and went to New York with a sailor and became the hostess for Jack Dempsey's restaurant on of 42nd Street. And she had to pay Jack Dempsey $13 a week to be hostess. But there's Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and she made huge money in tips from the stars. So then she was there for years, and then she went down to Leon and Eddie's, which is on 52nd Street. So she stayed in New York as a hostess. And then, so this bubble, I didn't realize, I was so young that I started realizing that everybody was saying what a nice personality my mother had. You know, I realized. So I was very happy to hear that. You know, especially she just cut out. So the idea is, so now Johnny Jesson takes one look at me. I got this huge tooth gone. I must have weighed, 60 pounds at the most, because there was no food, nothing but beer and bear meat in the refrigerator. and so, Duke, my dog, passed on, and so I was just out there in the trees with all these roses and stuff.
Wow.
And so Johnny looked at me, and instantly, he was real tall, a tiny voice that never developed, like a little tiny child's voice. And he just came up from L.A. to being on the Phil Harris band, and he was big time in Los Angeles. His eyes were really dark. He was just burned to a crisp. He became with no hair on top, and had high waist pants. Never saw, my dad was a regular construction stiff, and I walked into Sherman and Clay. This guy's got high waist pants with suspenders and a little tiny voice. And he looked at me like, whoa, that was it. So he said, yeah, I can schedule for clarinet lessons. So I said, okay. I was just completely knocked out by the way this guy looked. He must have been 6'4" and a little girl's voice, and it was
how wild.
It was wild. So then I go home to my dad, and I says, at Sherman and Clay, this teacher will give me a lesson for $2.50 a lesson, and he has to be paid in advance, and I need $10. So when I got my dad off the chicks, he says, here, Ronnie, here's the $10. So then I would hitchhike down to Sherman and Clay once a week, and the next thing I know, I started playing a whole lot of stuff going on, and he would play duets with me, and all of a sudden, he would take me to have soup for 25 cents. It was just like a A1 soup company, and it was like a carrot. You could they would drag the clarinet through the hot water. The carrot.
Oh, they were one carrot.
Yeah,
There's your soup.
Yeah, there's your soup. But then he taught me. Then I was always starving to death, and he became responsible to me. He looked at me with like, I don't know what I see in this kid, but I'm going to look out after him. So we go to a health food store and have a health food sandwich. I never had anything like that. It was either elk meat wrapped up, because my dad would go shoot these animals.
Really?
Yeah. It's like, oh, God. So,
what a trip.
Yeah, and that's how I lost my tooth, because the baseball really knocked half of it off.
Yeah.
But when I went up hunting with my dad, I stuck my nose down in an ice-cold stream, and boom, both eyes swelled shut. My face was like a powder puff full of junk, and so they went down to the hospital and they pulled it. But then they were so young, my mother and dad were so young, that they didn't have a clue of who I was. They weren't responsible. They were just very young, and so they never put a spacer in there. So it just grew together.
Yeah. Now, this is very interesting. I believe that people usually have two front teeth like this. You have one of them, and it's moved over to the center.
Yeah.
Right?
So can you see that? Yeah. So I got one tooth, and Buddy Cat
and that's perfect for holding a reed.
Yeah. We'd be playing these gigs, and if you ever want Buddy Cat to laugh, I'd be playing this clarinet with one tooth, and I could pivot, like this. I could pivot and Buddy would just die laughing because I could talk to somebody and pivot the torn, And so anyhow, Johnny became my father, and kept me fed, and then I would be out in Lake Forest Park and no money, foggy, climb up the lake road. I had to climb up the lake road. I think my right arm is longer from carrying my horns up to the but hitchhiking to Roosevelt High School. So the whole thing is that he would take me home and feed me at his home, and he would give me, you know, like a lesson every day. So then he said, well, I got this beautiful wife, I got a lovely Cadillac, and I got a home up on Magnolia Bluff, and I would like to be with my beautiful wife, so I'm going to give you my overflow, and I'll give you $1.75.
So you began teaching his students.
Yeah.
He didn't have time.
Yeah,
he had too many students.
Yeah, he was in one room and I was in another room, and so Johnny was booked solid. You know, he would take 110 students a week, taught at the University of Washington, taught Kenny G and all that kind of stuff, you know.
I wouldn't hold that against you.
Kenny was very nice to Johnny. I tried different ways to be nice. I would buy him carrot juice, you know. And so anyhow, he became my father. And so Flo's in New York, Eddie's out with the chicks and juicing, and nobody home. And in wintertime,